All right, I will call the meeting of Finance and Personnel Committee meeting to order on Tuesday, May 13th at 5:30. May we have roll call, please, Lori?
Crystal,
Here.
John will not be here. Emma,
Here.
Todd Kirking,
Here.
and Todd Spade.
Here.
All right. Item number 2 is the first period for public comment. If there's anyone online, it looks like no one's in the audience but staff. If anybody would like to speak to us, nobody there? Okay. Item number 3 is approval of the committee minutes from last meeting, which was 4/29 of 2025.
This is Todd. I'll approve the minutes.
Okay,
Todd, I'll second them.
okay. All those in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
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 Same sign. Minutes are approved. All right. Item number 4 is payment of the bills. Lori.
Okay, sorry about that. I had my stuff
That's
in the
okay.
council. In the original bills, I wanted to point out, we're paying the second installment for our assessor, the $8,200. That's on page 2.
Yep.
Also on that page is the tax collection software. They sent us the bill earlier this year, for 2025. So this will be for the full year, the $412.92. You will see on page 3, the pay request for the fire station that got paid after the last council meeting. We also have the first installment for our retiree, Norris Hockenstad's retirement benefit for the $5,000. You will see on page 4 that donation that was approved for the historic preservation of the $2,000 was paid out as well. That's the majority of the things to point out in the originals.
Anybody have any questions for Lori? Okay.
And then in the additional bills on the first page, you're going to see the $17,680. That is the comprehensive plan progress billing for March and April, and that is coming out of the ARPA funding. And the only other thing is to point out on page 5, there's that TID 7, the landfill gas migration investigation, all of that is coming out of TID 7 for the old landfill. So.
All righty. Any questions for Lori? You got all of mine.
I
Good
tried.
job. No? Then we'd be looking for a motion to approve the bills.
This is Todd. I move to approve the bills.
Todd, I'll second it.
Okay, motion and a second to approve the bills. May we have a roll call, please, Lori?
Emma,
Aye.
Todd Kirking,
Aye.
Todd Spade,
Aye.
and Crystal.
Aye. Okay, they're approved. We'll forward those on to the council tonight. All right, number 5 is a financial quarterly review, and I saw we got copies of that. Thank you.
Okay, well, we'll start at the beginning here. This is going to follow a pattern similar to what you've seen before. I do apologize for not being able to get it to you. My hope is always to have it to you before the weekend so that maybe you can have some light weekend reading, but I do try to spend some time in this meeting to sort of walk through it, and I don't think the information is so dense that we can't go through it at a good clip, but of course, as we go through it, if you have questions about what you see, by all means, stop me and ask your questions. So just a list of the things that we go through. And again, a quick note on the financials. We've all seen it before about how I typically display variances. And then priorities, again, this is just important to bring up. The reason why we do this is an exercise for the finance committee as well as all the department heads to be reviewing their numbers on a quarterly basis so that we can identify any issues and correct them midstream. So and again, what we're talking about here is the general fund. This does not bring into any of the other enterprise funds, sewer, water, cemetery, or anything like that. So here is expenses by type. Again, this is just meant to give you an overview of how we spend money here at the city in all the different categories. And so this is also helpful. The department heads to know really what they should be honing in on when they're looking at their budgets. This is what it looks like per department, so you know how we allocate funding among the different departments. Administrative does include a whole host of things that are citywide. Things like citywide insurance for property and liability. We don't break that out per department. That exercise would take a good deal of time to figure out how much the auto insurance to assign to the police department versus the public works department versus the fire. So we just sort of lump it all together under administration. So this is where things look like, and I'll try to zoom in where I can just to make life easier. So this is what expenses look like. Again, first column is where the amount is year to date. This is the overall 2025 budget that we approved for this year. And this is our two percentages that show the amount that we've expended through March. So here for contract for services, all contract for services across the city, we've expended 244,000 of the 885,000, which equates to 27.64%. And then just for comparison, because this is always important, I do include the amount that was expended of the 2024 budget through March of 2024. And that's always helpful because it helps us identify patterns and knowing that if percentages are higher, is it high just because it naturally comes out that way? Or is it really off compared to what we see as an annual trend? So you'll hear that word a lot, it follows trend. And so what you'll see here is that right now you would be alarmed because we're of our budget, we're at 73.4% of our total budget, but this does include capital and grant expenses. And you can see that the numbers up here really do skew the data. And this is particularly the fire station. And then down here, you see grant expenses. This was $2 million that we took from ARPA for the North Point project and then just acted as a pass-through to North Point in the year. So of course, when you see those numbers come through, it really makes it look pretty bad, which is why I typically tend to focus on these tables that exclude capital and grant expenses. So we can really look at the budgeting numbers. So here you can see that the number is much closer to what you would expect. And again, we're a quarter through the year. You would expect us roughly to have spent about a quarter of the money. And to break it down a little further, here are your wages. And again, the first bar, which is this light green bar, is 2023. How much have we expended of the budget through the 2023 budget? And then the same exercise for 24. And then the last one is 25. So this is just showing wages among the different departments. And again, what we're hoping to see generally is that the bars are at or below this 25% line. And you can see most departments land there. A couple of the other ones don't. Park and Rec, for example, is a good department to point out that some departments follow seasonal trends whereby they spend a lot more money in June, July, August, and so they have this spurt of spending when it comes to their wages, but then they pare down. You get into the October, November, December years. So really not a lot to point out here. Just a couple things, the other category, really the only wages here are the municipal court prosecutor. And it was a really slow start to the year for them. We were getting some really small bills. I think as the prosecutor was sort of getting up and running a little bit better, those bills have started hitting closer to what I budgeted on a monthly expense mark. And so you'll see that through March, they're fairly low. But nothing else other really to point out at this point. The little bit of overage in the library, Trina did note that because she's had some new staff, she has to spend time training that staff, which means she has to bring in subs to cover the work while those people are training. So that's why they're overage, but she has assured me that they will be able to compensate for it later in the year. Benefits equally are looking pretty darn good. The only thing you'll point out is Park and Rec, but again, a lot of this has to do with the fact that they're a small department that doesn't have a lot of benefits to them. So their benefits budget, which includes health insurance, life insurance, Social Security, Medicare, and some of those items is really small. And because they have the old director who had their third year of his health benefit, and that comes out right away in the year, it makes it seem like they're overspending when really that's just the pattern, and you can see that's consistent with what happened in 24. But other than that, what you'll note here is that the opt-out agreements have shown that we're sort of behind the trend line. And some of the some of the department heads were a little concerned about GLs because they were either under the budget. And the reality is when we created the budget, we didn't know where the savings exactly were going to land for health insurance. So we just came up with a number that we thought we were going to save overall, and then sort of spread it out proportionately to all the different departments, which was just a good way to spread it out, but it was never going to happen exactly like that, right? There's no way somebody could take a partial opt-out agreement for every single department. So that will have to be reconciled when we get into the budget amendment later this year. Contract for services are generally doing fine as well. Fire looks like it's a little ahead, but that's just the timing of building permits. And our building permits are looking really nice, revenue over expenses. I do have to take some time to analyze that with Chief Burrows, but for the most part, that looks like it's okay. What you'll see overall with a lot of departments, especially like Park and Rec, with the addition of the managed IT services, it really makes some of those percentages go up because the entire invoice for the year for managed IT services happens right at the beginning of the year. And the only other thing I'll point out is that the taxi cab invoices, Lori, I don't know if you want to just run through that real briefly.
If you remember at the last council meeting, we had the payment for 2 months worth of taxi cab. They had an issue with their email, so I never got the invoice for the February one. So February and March were both paid in April. So you'll see that a little bit over in the second quarter versus the first quarter.
But that's why this little bar is so far down. In terms of fuel and utilities, this is a spot where I would have a little bit of concern, but in reality, it seems to be thus far isolated to 2 departments. It's City Hall over here on the administrative and police. You can see police has a very high utility spending, and I spent some time looking at this, and some of it has to do with how we budgeted for water and sewer. But a lot of it has to do with just spikes in spending for electricity. And so we're going to have to look at Rick. I'm going to have to look at this with Rick and figure out what is going on. Did rates increase that much, or all of a sudden we're using that much more electricity, et cetera, et cetera. But that is a cause for concern within a couple of the departments, which is interesting because you can see some of the other departments, fire, library, and public works, all well below. Now, fire and public works also have fuel. Fuel is part of the utilities, so it is possible that they're also spending less on fuel. So I think across the board, we're just going to have to keep a tight eye on fuel and utilities and just make that a priority. The one other thing I will note, especially for the police department, is that with the way that our gas bills hit, usually we're paying in the beginning of the year for the December bill from the previous year, the January bill, and the February bill. And those are the 3 biggest heating months. So you're often going to see, 66% of your or more of your heating expenses land in the first quarter of a year. And so that's to a certain degree to be expected. But even then, we're spending more on gas than certainly what we had budgeted. So we'll keep an eye on that and pivot as needed. Maintenance, equipment, and supplies. The first thing you'll notice is this big jump in the administrative budget. This was all the firewalls that we purchased for all the departments. So we ended up purchasing a good amount of cybersecurity equipment for every department, and this is paid off through ARPA for the most part. So you'll see here, we have every year the City Hall has a $2,700 computer budget. That doesn't go a really long way. We expended that plus another 10,000 of ARPA on top of that, plus we overspent by another $2,000 because in speaking with the mayor and speaking with Mike from MCS Networks, you cannot not have a firewall at each building. He's like, that's where security begins and ends, is with a good firewall. That's how they access the system. That's how they do their managed IT services. And he was very adamant about that. So we did what we needed to do, and we spent that money. But everything else seems pretty on track. Cale did note that this is a little lower because they haven't, as of March, hadn't been invoiced for summer equipment. The one thing, and you'll see this in a couple places, I didn't get any feedback from Rick on his budget and actuals prior to this meeting, other than a few words he shared with me verbally. I think he had some technology errors with his spreadsheet, although I don't know what those were exactly. And so I don't have any feedback from him in this quarterly report. And so hopefully, I was hoping he would be here tonight, but it sounds like he has the day off as well. So we'll have to try to run down that information from Rick at a later time. Moving on. This last piece here is a pretty small part of the budget, so it's sort of like the miscellaneous other category. I did not, these numbers right here probably aren't exactly on, but they're generally in the ballpark. And as you can see here, administrative, you see a lot of spending. This is where, again, citywide insurance comes out. A couple other things you'll note is that for Sarah in 2024, the reason it was so high here is because of a lot of grant expenses that came in early. And at that point, they hadn't necessarily been pulled out into a sort of a different category. But again, and for Cale in particular here, he happens to pay for his IT contract out of his other budget. Because it covers both parks and recreation. And so that's why you see the spike there, as well as a spring conference. So again, I don't have a lot of concerns about that one as well. Anything about expenses you folks have questions on? Here's just the overview for all the departments.
On the first slide, there was 900 and some thousand. And is that money that has come in as well, or is that all spending? I mean, is that some of the grants that have come in?
So yeah, so that's that 958 you're talking about
Yep.
right there. So for the fire station project, we have not only the $900,000 from the townships that was delivered to us, last August, something to that effect, July, August area. But we've also been sitting on 3.2 million in long-term debt proceeds that were borrowed for last year that have been sitting in an investment account. And so that's, as pay requests are being made, Lori and I and the mayor are looking at our cash balance and making a decision of when to pull money from the investment so that we can keep a healthy enough cash balance while still allowing enough money to sit in investments and keep accruing dollars. So the short answer to that question is yes, there are revenues. A lot of those revenues came in 2024 though. But we are also working on finalizing the first reimbursement request for the fire station with the USDA for that grant money. That's the money we haven't received yet, is the 5.25 million.
Anybody else have any questions for Lori or Nate? No? Emma, you good? Any questions?
No, I don't have any questions. This is great. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, good question. So let's, yeah. So if you look at, right there, other, prior to 2024, we had not split out their utility costs at the airport into a separate GL. It was just being lumped in with the maintenance. And so we had, this is the work we've been doing over the years of trying to pull stuff apart and get it into more discrete accounts. And so, yeah, that's why there's not. And sometimes it's just the fact that they haven't spent anything yet. So, you know, if they only have one GL that falls into that particular category and nothing's coming for it, it is going to show up at a zero sometimes. But That's a good question. And Parks and Rec, I think it was the same thing. I think up until somewhat recently, they didn't have an other account, or again, perhaps they just hadn't spent out of it yet.
Nicely done. Nicely done. Thank
Okay.
you for that.
So I just want to go through revenue, and again, this is a good conversation. So again, this is our revenues. This is where we're at through March. Again, you can see it's fairly consistent between years about how much comes in through the end of March. General property taxes, the only thing to note here is our room tax. And the reason for this is that the majority of what you're seeing in room tax currently in 2025 is actually money brought in from 2024, and it just hasn't been journal entered back yet. When I went back and looked at 2024, all of the fourth quarter room tax had been, I think, journal entered back into the previous year. So that's the difference there. It's not like we're bringing in a lot different money. It's just the timing of journal entries from what I can see.
And some of that I can't do until after the audit's done, just so you know.
Here is intergovernmental. This is a huge slice of what we bring in. Outside of taxes, this is our next biggest revenue stream. And I sort of skip by that here. You can see here taxes, intergovernmental revenue, and then everything else is a pretty small portion, makes up 13% after that. So when we look at intergovernmental revenue, you'll see that there's a lot of 0% and 0%. So intergovernmental revenues really follow an annual pattern, right? We don't get our state computer aid this early. We don't get our shared taxes from the state. Obviously, that's a big one, $1.3 million. We usually don't see a disbursement on that until I think it's July, and then another one in November, perhaps. And so all that's normal, and why it's important that we're looking at trends, because otherwise some people might get alarmed, is like, hey, when's that 1.3 million going to show up? The answer is not yet. Did you have something, Larry? So the biggest concern on this one, and this is a major concern, is the intergovernmental revenue. We are currently very much underperforming in this particular revenue line. We were expecting over the course of the year, 252,000. Right now, we're on pace to be 40,000 short. It's a large amount of money. And Cheryl and I, and Cheryl, if you want to say anything, by all means, jump up at the podium. But Cheryl and I spent a good amount of time today sort of walking through how did we get to the forecast, what happened, because that intergovernmental revenue is tax equivalency payments from the water utility to the city. And after working with it through her today, we continue to identify there's a heck of a lot of variables that go into the calculation of that amount. It has a lot to do with the values of the water utility property, the mill rates of the school district, the tech college, the city, which we don't know until after the budgets are formed. Not to mention the assessment ratio of the of where the city's at. And that's what we identified, is that the assessment ratio dropped dramatically from 80 to 70%, which means that the water utilities property went from approximately a $12 million assessed valuation to 10.5. It dropped $1.5 million in assessment value. And if that value would have stayed consistent, we would be hitting budget. But because it didn't, we are not. And so on top of that, I believe I got a little aggressive with trying to anticipate an uptick, and because we had seen over the course of the last few years a steady uptick in the amount of intergovernmental revenue that was then sort of took a step back, we believe, because of the mistakes that the county had made on their debt service. We talked about it at the last quarterly report, but I think long story short, there's two things that need to happen here. One is that we just need to be aware of it and be prepared to figure out what we're going to do with that deficit, because $40,000 isn't an easy thing to make up. And I don't have a plan for you as of yet, or what we need to do other than start to address it. The second thing I'll note is that we need to be better about really trying to figure out what the proper way to forecast that dollar amount is. Because of a number of variables, many of which are not available to us at the time we need to lock down the budget, it's very much crystal ball work. So, so something to look at, something to think about, but I did really want to highlight to you because while the rest of, you'll see this quarterly report is going very, very well. The two items, and this one being the biggest one, are something that should be red flags for everybody right now. Other than that, there's nothing really to point out for this other than the mass transit assist. Again, this is related to the taxi cab. You can see it's very low. Last year we had 52,000. I don't know if Lori, 52,000, 52%. Again, I think a lot of this has to do with timing and delays and
There's several delays because they went into a new system this year, so they are backlogged and getting in the contracts ready to go. So until we have a contract signed for the operations, they're not going to release any of the funds yet. So that's one of the biggest delays.
permits, fines, forfeitures. Going really, really well. Everything you can see is ahead of budget with the exception of building permits. But let it be known that 2024 was a bit of an anomaly for building permits. We had some very large permits being taken out at the beginning of the year last year. And you could see that we were already well on our way. Whereas we're still above trends, 32%. I would say this is probably more normal in terms of how many permits come out in the first 3 months. And I think things are going well there. Everything else is not, they're not big dollar amounts, but you can see, interestingly enough, fines and forfeitures are ahead of schedule on both parking violations and what's going on at the library. It's certainly not going to make up for some of the other deficits we've seen, but it is nice to know that our budget projections are holding in other places. Oops, sorry, sort of skipped ahead. Alcohol license, you can see here, Lori's getting to deal with that fund right now, and that usually hits around what, June, Lori?
Everybody's getting them in earlier, so we're going to get them, the money's popping in here May. So you'll see them in the second quarter.
Public charges for service, big thing here is airport fuel income. Lori, do you want to explain what you have to do with that? Real briefly?
That is actually a separate checking account. And so when they actually do the ins and outs of that, I actually have to do a journal entry into our general ledger. And unfortunately, I have not done that yet. So there's money there. It just hasn't been put into the general ledger. So.
And that's a common thing with both airport fuel and expenses. Airport income, again, you can sort of see this here. The one thing I will note here is that they did get some land rent income that was supposed to go to another GL. So that's a little inflated right there, which is why you see that at 41%. Everything else is pretty normal. You'll see that Kale's department is doing really well. Kale, you must be really promoting the heck out of the shelters because the shelter rental is already well exceeded projections by almost $1,000, which I haven't seen that since I've been here. So I don't know if you know what's going on. Way to go. $1,000 at a time. We'll make up deficits, right? So that's great. And then on top of it is recreation income versus where they were at through March is certainly well ahead of pace. I don't know if there's anything special he's doing there. I think maybe opening registration a little earlier.
They do an online or something different too in towards the end of last year? No? Yeah.
So Kale just mentioned that pickleball was huge last year, but I think our guess is that just registration opening just a little bit sooner allowed people to get in faster and for that income to hit in March, more in March instead of April. Other than that, the one other thing that I wanted Rick to talk to us about was the special police services, which is for the DMV.
Also, I think in there, I'm not sure if it's in that account or not, but I'm thinking that it might have been in April, but we have been receiving checks on a monthly basis on the municipal court reimbursements as well. And I'm not sure if any of that is in there in the wrong spot, but I don't think it hit till April. So I'm not exactly sure on the DMV side of things on either, but I do want to let you know that we were holding on to those checks because we weren't sure how we were going to post them. But you will see an inundating of like 4 months worth coming in.
Yeah, Special Police Services I've watched that for quite some time now, and what's really interesting about it is because they sell license plates, but they also have to buy the license plate, and there is no separate, it all comes out of one revenue line, right? So they just deduct it from the revenue instead of like many of our other departments that show it on the what's the expenditure for it and what is the revenue, and then see how it matches up. So it's a very volatile. It could be 13,000 now, but in 2 months it could be negative 400. And again, Rick and I have been talking about it sometime in the need to get better eyes on that, and figure out what's going on there, because it is one that, I'll be frank with you, I don't have a good grasp on how it performs, and we need to do a little bit better on that particular GL. Okay. All right, we'll just keep moving here. All other revenue, you'll see here, this is the township salary share, similar to what I talked about, the special police services. This is one that we've really tried to keep a tight eye over the years. I think Chief Burrows and Joy Conley have done a wonderful job working together to try to make sure that we're doing accurate billing and that it's happening in a timely fashion. And I think this is reflective of that. About last year, we were behind in requesting our payments, where this year we're much closer to achieving sort of our trend for the year. Lori, did you have any comment? Okay, looked like you're going to say something.
Well, I was going to say we had trouble with one particular town as well that was not submitting their payments on a timely basis. So that could have been another one of those issues that I believe we've addressed. And hopefully it's getting better.
General fund revenue interest here. You can see that this is where we're making our dollars for the money that we have invested with Ellers from the long-term debt proceeds. In 2024, those numbers were off the chart because that's when our principal sitting in the investment was the largest, right? We had a large amount of money sitting there ready to go. Whereas this year, we're still doing really well. You can see we've almost hit our budget projections for the year. It's just not going to get to the levels that last year was. And especially as we're doing more pay requests for the fire station and the Main Street project, we continue to draw down those funds out of the investment because we need them to pay for our.
Plus the ARPA funds have now been mostly spent. We had all the ARPA money was still sitting in the general
that's
fund, and we
right.
have now been spending it.
Yep, thank you. And so the ARPA funds were a lot of what we were holding on for North Point. We were gaining a tremendous amount of interest on that, but we had to pay them their money because it was passed through for the construction. And so the last of the ARPA money has been paid as a pass through to the.
Plus the other ARPA money that we hadn't spent yet or allocated
Sure.
was in there as well.
That was a decent amount of money, but that was no more than a couple 100,000 versus 4 million, right?
Well, yeah, the millions help.
All right. And then everything else, this one here, again, this rent one, this just goes back to the fact that the airport income got one of the amounts that was supposed to go into this rent GL. So just working with the clerks on making sure things go into the right GL. And that will be journal entries and fixed later. All right. Anything on revenues before I move on? Okay, net cash position. Lori does a really nice job of giving me these numbers every year, and probably need to simplify this a little bit. It's probably a little too many colors, but the blue line is 2025, and every color before it is just a different year at that point in time. And so you can kind of sort of see the pattern. It's kind of a reverse bell curve, right? Where we get taxes up front, and then we spend, and then we get a little bump of taxes later in the year, and sort of finish strong. You'll see that our cash position has dwindled through April to lower than it has been in the last 4 years. But again, some of that is purposeful because it does not include 1.39 million in general fund money sitting out there as an investment. So we do have more near liquid cash on hand. It's just a matter of we're trying to let it generate money before we have to pull it and put it back in here. And again, we're also waiting on some reimbursements and things like that. And then finally, just monthly revenue over expenses. This is pretty typical in the year. And this black line is what the budget is for both revenue and expenses, right? A little over at $6 million mark. And so again, just showing that we bring in a lot of revenue early on and then expenses sort of catch up. This drop in revenue is due to the settlement with the county and the other taxing entities. Here's just like, again, another overview of revenue over expenses. Again, the key is just looking at percentages that we've earned versus percentages that we've spent. And again, this is skewed a little bit because in this one particular one, I did not take out capital projects, where you can see that the fire station and its spending using dollars that we brought in back in 2024 is really sort of driving up that number. And again, these are just the takeaways. I highlighted the ones I really want people to hear in bold, is that intergovernmental revenue. I'm trying to figure out what we need to do about the tax equivalency payments and the deficit there. Everything else on revenue seems to be very strong right now. On the expense side, wages, benefits are working well. IT is making our percentages really go up, especially for smaller departments, because their entire budget comes out at the beginning of the year. So that's just more of a note than a concern. And then fuel and utilities for a couple departments is higher, and we need to look at it and see if we have an issue with the rates, or are we leaving lights on, or, you know, just some stuff like that. Like, what is going on where we're seeing such a spike? And so that's going to take some investigation. But again, that's the point of doing these quarterly reports. And so again, my overall thoughts on it is that we're doing well, but there are two issues that are large enough that they weren't looking into immediately. And I'll have some updates for you with the next report. Okay. Unless the group wants them sooner.
And did you say the intergovernmental revenue, the utility, that some of the values of the property came in lower? Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, and Cheryl, again, if you want to jump up, you're more than welcome to, and I'll start. So essentially, the equalized value of the property went up
Okay.
for the water utility properties. The problem is that the assessment ratio across the city went down from 80% assessed value to equalized value to 70%, which caused the assessed value to be 10.5 million versus 12 roughly.
Okay, that's fine. I just needed to hear it again.
Anything else regarding
you.
the tax equivalency that you can shed light on?
No, that was basically the big kicker right there. If we would have been consistent, so like 2 years ago, we were at, I think, 0.789. And then last year we were at 0.81. If we would have stayed consistent, we would not have been as dramatic. When we had talked last October or so, we had kept in mind that there was that mistake. And I did tell Nate that I was figuring it would come in about 232, 235. But again, Nate and I have no idea about that assessment ratio. So I have reached out to Kim, the auditor, just to find out if there's any other way we can figure this out ahead of time besides in December. So, I mean, at the end of December, we could know if everything was in and all the entities had their stuff in, but it still wouldn't happen for budget time, right? So I don't know what other municipalities do regarding this. So it's a good thing that, Nate and I kind of had talked about maybe
Right.
looking into that.
And the intergovernmental revenue and tax equivalency has always been a very steady budget item that has always performed very well to budget or slightly better. And I think what tripped us up was just a couple anomalies, and one is the county's issue with their debt service and how that impacts us, and two is just how dramatic assessment ratios are dropping for us. And again, we're going through a citywide reassessment this year, and how that impacts things going forward and what our tax equivalency will be next year is again what Cheryl and I want to get ahead of. And I think she's dead on that. Talking to our auditors, one, but talking to other communities, say, what methods are you using to try to nail down a fairly sizable sum of money for the city? I mean, we're talking $500,000 or $250,000. It's a very large chunk of money and to be off on that 5% in either direction is tough. So, thanks, Cheryl.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much. Any else questions? You don't need any kind of approval or anything.
No, this is just an FYI. I did send it out a couple hours ago. So if you read through it and want more information, we can always bring it back for clarification or further discussion at following finance personnel meetings.
So item number 6. Item number 6 is administrative updates.
Okay. Alcohol is my life right now. So everybody, I'm very hopeful that I'm actually going to have almost everybody in a lot earlier this year. I did a little different this year, and I actually did everything mostly by email, and people are responding a lot quicker. So it's going well. So that'll be coming up in the near future here. Working on bank recs and trying to get caught up on things such as the airport and journal entries and stuff like that. This is the time of year now also going into the summer where we're doing election system cleanup because we don't have any fall elections. So it's basically going through and sending out letters to those that have absentee requests out there that didn't return one, that are indefinitely confined and never returned one. So we have to let them know, do you still want to have that? And so it's a little cleanup like that we have to go through. So we're working on that. I have Beth working on some of the ordinance updates. We're trying to get those in a more reasonable format to be able to put on the website. So I've got her kind of trying to make it consistent. I know our legal people have been putting that together, so she's working on that. Have been attending some of the revolving loan. We have a revolving loan through our CDBG program that has a few $1,000s left in it, but they are going to be removing and ending that program. And so we're going to be going through how to close out the funds and get that back. So when it's paid in and paid back, we're going to have to turn it over into the state. So that's something new that's coming down the pike. Reviewing some things with the auditors. They're put together a Form C that's due here like tomorrow. So they sent me a draft of that. So I'm kind of like reviewing it to see if it looks okay. And then I don't remember if I told you at the last one, but the ARPA reporting was completed for this year. So everything is up and done on that. So that's about it for now.
Questions for Lori? No, thank you very much. Busy.
Yep. So just real quick from my side here, Hanson Farm is quite the beast right now. We're in sort of the crunch time. I'm working to make sure that everything is in line from the infrastructure to getting borrowings set up. So I mean, working with our financial advisors and just making sure we have a plan. We're going to be going into an S&P rating here shortly. And then the development agreements and just making sure all that is shoring up. We took the development agreements through the VDA last Thursday for sort of the preliminary review of the deals. We're talking with, not to mention several other developers who are all of a sudden coming out of the woodwork on a number of properties. There's a lot of interest in Baroque right now, which is great. It's really great. But the timing is a little bit troublesome because we're in the process of trying to push forward one of the biggest development projects that the city's spearheaded in the Hanson Farm. And so trying to carve out time for other smaller projects is a little challenging. The comprehensive plan is going well. We're spending time on that. We're having meetings every other week. Cindy and Kale are sitting in on that and are going to become a little bit more involved of taking, having more individual meetings with with the consultants for their part of the plan, the comprehensive outdoor rec plan and the historic preservation plan respectively. And all in all, it's been a really good experience so far. I think we've got really great consultants and they're very professional, as well as accommodating to what we would like to see. And they're giving us some latitude to sort of drive the boat while still providing good guidance. And then the final thing is just working with the USDA on reimbursement for the fire station. Unfortunately, through staff attrition, we've been juggled to 2 new representatives over the course of the last 2 months. So we lost Koo and Nate, who are somewhat long-term representatives. They took early retirement. We had this girl named Nicole for the blink of an eye and then got juggled over to somebody named Julie, who's been wonderful, but we're having to spend quite a bit of time of sort of resending documents to make sure that the docket is fully complete and that they're ready to send reimbursement. So on top of that, things like getting CSMs done, deeds, filing stuff. I mean, it's just, you get $5.25 million of money is great, but it doesn't come without a significant amount of work, and probably rightly so, but we're working through that right now. Any questions for me?
Thank you. Thank you.
I just am always, Emma, I'm always just incredibly impressed with the amount of work that goes into this. So I can read between the lines. It's a lot of work. Thank you so much for making it really understandable for me.
Thank you, Emma.
All right. Item number 7 is the second period for public comment. We don't have any online either. Okay, we'll go right to adjournment then.
This is Todd. I'll make a motion to adjourn.
This is Emma, second that motion.
All right, all those in favor of adjournment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Visuals are very helpful.
Yeah, it's it's easier at the beginning of the year when